was progressing in my career, but I found that, with progressing up, it equaled a lot more loneliness, for one, being sometimes one of few women, usually being, one of the only women of color. And so it was a little bit isolating. And, just the work relationships that I had, I just felt like I was kind of betraying more and more of me, or leaving more and more of me at home to progress in this career. And I was at a point where I was like, what is this all for? And so I quit.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to unraveling the journey of being authentic in the workplace. Today is my very first guest. Her name is Tekisha Harvey, and she's a good friend of mine. So she's about to share the roles that she takes on at work, and I say roles with an S because she has what I would consider a portfolio career. And that's both having different roles within organizations, but also doing some things that are a little more entrepreneurial. And the way that she puts her work out into the world is more of a mosaic or a portfolio than a linear career path. In this episode, we cover everything from being the only in the workplace, in this case, the only woman of color, to practicing radical self-love and talking about how that can help us be more authentic in our careers. So thank you so much for joining, and I can't wait to share this conversation with you. Welcome to the Working Your Way podcast, and I'm here with my very first guest ever. I could not have it any other way. Tekisha Harvey, welcome.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm really happy to have you here.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Good. Well, tell me why.
Because we always have good talks, and it always starts out one way, and then I feel like it's a little bit of therapy because you have like this little insight or something. And so I think I'm just answering questions, and then all of a sudden I'm self-reflecting and finding epiphanies. And so
occupational hazard of being friends with me is that you have to have like deep life revelations on a regular basis.
Luckily, I'm okay with that.
I know you are, and that is why I'm thrilled to have you on today. So why don't we start out? I'll give you a little intro space, and just why don't you tell me what is the title that you use at work? And in your case, it's titles, and it's something I want to talk about today with your awesome kind of mosaic portfolio career.
Yeah, usually depending on the audience, I usually start off with my current job title, which is managing partner, head of marketing at Flower Hire. I say it's a recruiting company. It's a cannabis recruiting company that finds people executive jobs in cannabis. And then I say I also publish I've created and published a cannabis magazine for women designed to help educate them on the benefits of cannabis and CBD from a lifestyle perspective. So I'm a little bit entrepreneur, a little bit working with I wouldn't necessarily call it a startup, but maybe a growth stage company. But still, not corporate at all. And then also working in cannabis it's always a fun thing to say and see how people react.
Yeah, and I do want to talk a little bit about how your career journey led you into cannabis, as many people could say, like a personal journey might lead you somewhere and a personal passion might lead you somewhere. But would you mind kind of just take us through, like, what has the overall journey of your career been like? So you mentioned you're not in corporate now. What did that look like when you started out?
Well, I did the thing, that, parents want you to do. I will say I'm of Caribbean descent, so I have immigrant parents from different countries in the Caribbean. I was actually born in the Bahamas. And so coming to America, it's like, doing the American dream. They instilled in us, like, hard work, going to college, getting a good job. So I did those things and started my career working in New York City in fashion, working in the buying office at Macy's. I spent 6 years in New York, and so I started at Macy's, moved over to Coach, and then Ralph Lauren, really working behind the scenes, doing merchandise planning, really numbers, analytical things, so very corporate, large corporations. And then after 7 years, I was, kind of burnt out on New York City. 9/11 happened while I lived there. And I decided I just wanted a break from working. You'll see this theme come up again. And I said, I'm going to go back to school. I went to graduate school full time at the University of Maryland and got my MBA. And it was through that process that I really learned about, brand management and marketing. I had, worked a bit in for some great brands, but really understood learning about how to apply that on a grander scale, like all of the practice and the art that went in, the science that went into brand management. And so I worked for 8 years for Conagra Brands, which is a huge consumer packaged goods company. And I lived in 3 different states, working with them, went in the corporate offices and 2 different sales offices, and worked with like one of the second largest grocery accounts in the US, Kroger. And it was through that time that I just basically was like over, at that point, I'd been like kind of working for 16 years in corporate spaces, and really just got burnt out and fed up. I consider myself a lifetime achiever and learner. And I was progressing in my career, but I found that, with progressing up, it equaled a lot more loneliness, for one, being sometimes one of few women, usually being, one of the only women of color. And so it was a little bit isolating. And, just the work relationships that I had, I just felt like I was kind of betraying more and more of me, or leaving more and more of me at home to progress in this career. And I was at a point where I was like, what is this all for? And so I quit. I made a plan and quit my corporate job and became a backpacker, if you will, but not a backpacker, because I don't do backpacks. I do suitcases, but
slightly more a bougie backpacker.
Yeah, yes, right. I was like, not hostels. I'll do Airbnbs. But I, traveled and was a part of some co-working retreats, and just met a bunch of people, and which extended my travel. And from there, I started independent consulting, using all the knowledge that I had to help like smaller businesses with branding and marketing strategies, and reconnected with a former coworker who had started a market research company focusing on cannabis. And that's actually how I got into the cannabis space. It was doing focus groups and surveys and product testing with cannabis consumers and patients, like helping cannabis brands understand their consumers. And it really changed my mind about, one, the plant and what it was, because, grew up in the war on drugs era, the just say no era, and really started to understand.
The DARE classes
absolutely,
in elementary
right?
school.
Right. This is and they were saying, they say marijuana, I say cannabis, but like they say, oh, it's the gateway drug. If you start using this, next thing you'll be on crack. And not true. And which is a lot of things that I learned, and really found out about how this plant was helping people, and how much people were using it for wellness. And just really got ignited around the industry, because there was a lot of people in it. Everyone's like very passionate about the plant. So there was not all the politics of previous, corporations. The industry is super new. And so it's almost like it's not established yet to have all these rules and regulations and office politics. Now they exist, but nowhere to the level of a traditional corporate environment. And so that was welcoming to me. In addition, having an entrepreneurial spirit is really needed in this space, because like I said, it's new and everyone's, trying to figure it out. So you have to be a player and a coach, and wanting to get in there and build out new processes and figure out how to do things better. And then again, there's this camaraderie within the space, that people have this passion for the plant. And so there's this purpose that is shared, that I feel like is so different than past environments. So that's what led me to cannabis. And within that space, like I said, after working with the research company, I started the magazine. And then 2 years later, or a year later, I started working with Flower Hire, still staying within cannabis and still doing the magazine as well.
So there's so many questions I want to ask you, and I want to talk about the breaks from your career, because I obviously had a big one of those, or actually 2 of them myself. But I want to rewind a little bit to you going from working in New York fashion to you going into working in a Midwestern-based food company that sells like frozen dinners, to retailers.
For $1.
Yeah. Like, what was that? I mean, I have to imagine that was a very stark contrast in work environment, in how you felt about work. Maybe there were parts of you that you couldn't fully bring to work in both spaces, but they might have been different. Like, tell me a little bit more about that, like, switch.
Yeah, absolutely, completely different. And in one way, I remember I would tell people, like, I used to work on luxury. My last corporate job in New York was working at Ralph Lauren. I helped launch relaunch their accessories brand for Ralph Lauren, the stores, which had a price point of about, handbags were like $3,000. And I was like, I went from working on really luxury, high end apparel and accessories that was really only accessible to a few, to working on, Chef Boyardee and Banquet and Marie Callender, brands that were household in like 95% of households. So it was like, oh, now people understood what I did, like, because there was 55 brands at Conagra. Someone had access to some of them in their house, versus like when I say I'm working on Ralph Lauren collection handbags, people were like, what is that? So in one way it was like, oh, people now have a closer connection to what I do. But from a work standpoint too, New York City is a completely different cultural environment to the Midwest. I think that one of the things I remember when I first moved to Chicago and getting on the phone and talking to people, I just get right down to business, and people be like, whoa, wait, like, you got to warm up. You got to ask people about their kids. You got to talk about the weather a little bit. Like, it's the perception was you're not, being like friendly if you're not asking about something besides business first off. Whereas in New York, it's like we get to business first, then we do the friendly talk after. So that was definitely a cultural adjustment. In addition to fashion, like, the cultures of the offices, every office has their own little politics. Working in New York City, working for big brands, you're expected to show up as that brand. So, decked out. And when I worked for Coach, only Coach handbags. When I worked for Ralph Lauren, you were only in Ralph Lauren clothing. And so that was part of the office culture, so in terms of showing up as myself, well, if myself did not, meet the Ralph Lauren brand, sorry, because you need to wear Ralph Lauren clothes. It was definitely one of those markers of success. Like, how much do you understand the brand? And then working at Conagra, same, you're expected to really, partake and eat the foods that you're the brands that we're working on, because that's part of the company's success. I was like, I don't eat Chef Boyardee. I'm vegetarian now. I did say that. Okay. I was like, I'm vegetarian now. I can't. Gluten thing. I can't eat the pasta now. But so there's like these different nuances, but yet and still, each of them, I think every office, every business has their own kind of culture code, and a lot of times they weren't necessarily built for people like me, a Black woman, of Caribbean descent, so fitting, it's always some morphing and some shifting that I felt I had to do in order to fit in, be understood, be seen, and progress in my career.
I was really interested in asking Tekisha about this moment because this kind of juxtaposition in her career is really interesting, not just from a business sense of having two very different types of brands that she was representing, but in the work environment of going from this fast-paced fashion job in New York to a Midwestern-based food company that's really rooted in tradition. And not many of us have this kind of side-by-side comparison and experience, but I think it can really help us learn about what we want in our careers if we can tune into how we feel in each of these different environments. And I think the reality is that in a new job, so many of us are kind of singularly focused on learning and performing in this new place and making a name for ourselves that we don't really stop to tune in to how the place makes us feel and what important data is there for us in that process in our own career progression. I think assimilating to a culture is inevitable in some ways, in the sense that like we're working for an organization that has some built-in structures and norms, but where a company culture or a leader in particular is asking you to conform to one way of doing things or really one way of showing up, or even worse, of leaving parts of your identity at home, I think this is where it really becomes problematic and where it can really negatively impact our well-being. So here we're going to dig deeper into what navigating that really looked like for her.
What do you feel like in those were the parts of that in the, I think about assimilation versus conformity, where it's like, to some extent, you're working for any company, you assimilate to their way of working, or you wear the clothes, right? Maybe things like that. But then there's parts of it that are, and you mentioned this, like you had to leave parts of yourself at home, or parts that feel like a little more abandonment than assimilation? Like what were the parts that were maybe acceptable to take on and not acceptable to take on?
For myself, I remember feeling like culturally, like a Black culture was not something that was as acceptable in the workplace as because it wasn't part of the dominant culture. Now, granted, I'm a little bit older, so that has shifted a bit. But I remember being in some of those spaces, and for example, BET, Black Entertainment Network, versus MTV, and being like there would be shows or music or things that would be on BET, and if I brought that up, no one knew what I was talking about, and they would just look at me blankly. But everyone knew, this for reference, this wasn't it, but like, for example, like Sex in the City, everyone knew that. And I was like, well, okay, that's fine, but or Friends, but no one knew, Martin, for example. I don't know. So that was like something where it's like, that's a big part of socializing at work, talking about what you do outside of work. What are you watching on TV? What are you listening to? And people not understanding where your point of view or your reference point. So it's like, okay, well, that's a big part of my relaxation and leisure, and that people at work don't get it. So I just can't talk about it. I have to just act like or watch what they're watching or, partaking in. So that's one big example that comes to mind. I mean, there's also, being single or not having kids, that was another one where people are talking about at some point. I remember working in New York City in my early 20s, and it's around 25, 24, everyone was getting married, everyone's getting engaged. And so their lives, their lives at home, were changing, right? And so now it's like, oh, we're doing this, now we're doing, and if you're single, you're like, I don't fit into that, and I don't know what you're talking about. As I got older, working in the Midwest, everyone's married with kids, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy because they're like, oh, you do stuff by yourself, you don't have someone, and like it really messes with your mind. And then you just move, and you're like, oh, I'm normal. Or there's more.
Along the way, did you have any moments where you were like, how did I get here?
Cincinnati, Ohio. I knew how I got there because I was living in Tampa, Florida, and I got promoted, and this was a big deal. I was going to be a director. I was going to be over like this huge account, and I got there, and I knew no one in Cincinnati, outside of my coworkers, and I was like, "What did I just do?" I remember getting off the airplane, in the airports in Kentucky, and I was like, "Oh my God, what did I just do?" This is going to be different, and it was. In those moments, looking back on it, at that point, I had moved a few times for work and for graduate school, and I had just taken it on as, you know what, we'll see what this brings, and if you don't like it, you don't have to stay.
Yeah, I somehow successfully worked for P&G for 13 years and never lived in Cincinnati, and.
What?
I'm like some sort of sorcery. I'm not sure, but there's something about, but I did live in St. Louis, and of course I spent plenty of time in Cincinnati, and I know that like those cities are ones that, sure, the quality of life can be really good for some people, but if you haven't grown up there, it's really hard to make friends. If you don't have your kids like classmates at school and things like that, where you're integrating through other people. I feel like it can be a really difficult experience in terms of like, hey, I'm not from here. I don't have any other connections to here, and moving into a new place.
Yeah, absolutely. And the telltale sign of a smaller market or a very close-knit market is people ask you what high school you go to, and I'm like, I'm not from here. I didn't go to high school here. So, then it's immediately like, oh, well, they kind of stand back a little bit, and it's hard to break into those circles. Luckily I did meet some great people there, outside of work, a few, but it was difficult. And so going into a smaller environment. So when I worked there, I worked in a sales office. It was about 50 people, but by the time I left, it was probably about 30, due to some reductions. And I was the only, I think I was one of two for half of the time. I was there for 2 years. Half the time, one of the years, I was the only female in leadership there, only Black person in leadership there. And so again, it was isolating at times. And there were, and not to mention I was a little bit younger as a leader, to be a director. And so always feeling like I had to prove my worth to be there. Not because I couldn't do the job, but just to people, just the nature of, they're like, who's this young person coming in here leading and thinking she's going to change things. And so there's that pressure too, to overperform, if you will, to make sure that you're not questioned. And that's a lot. That weighs a lot on you. And when I left, that was the last job I had, my last corporate job before I left. I didn't realize the amount of pressure and stress that I had on myself until I left. And I felt this amazing weight lift off me. And so it was the epiphany of, and at that job, I made good money, had a nice car, I could buy whatever I wanted, within reason, whatever I wanted. And I was not happy, work was too much a part of my life. I remember just going home every day and watching TV for 5 hours to numb out and have some wine, walk my dog. But it's funny, I look at that now because after I had quit and I barely watch TV anymore, but I used to watch TV like from 5 to 10 p.m. every day, and we're like, okay, time to go to bed and do this all over again. So I'm very thankful for my time there because I had so many epiphanies post there, and it gave me the courage to actually make a change and eject myself, as I like to say, from that corporate environment and all of the things that I was told I should do. But I could say, hey, I did them and it didn't work. So it didn't work for me. It may work for other people, but I was very clear, it didn't work for me.
Yeah, you checked the boxes, you did the things you're supposed to do, and you were successful at them, and then made a choice to go a different way.
Yes.
So one of the reasons I started this podcast was, people like you who are in these really cool jobs, and you are, what I've seen, knowing Flower Hire and having them as a client before, there are people in your organization that really look up to you. They see you, they see your confidence, they see how vibrant you are, and they're like, I want to be that way. I want to bring some accessibility to the idea of if you don't feel that way now, that's okay, but you can get there. And so I want to kind of go back a little bit too to what were some of you talked about proving your worth, right? Being the only, in many different vectors can, people do refer to it as imposter syndrome, but at the same time, it's just, if you're a blue square in a room of red circles, it feels like you don't belong because everybody else is a red circle.
Right.
What were some of the ways that showed up for you in the proving yourself, in the maybe overachieving, or, needing to kind of, we talked about show up with the receipts all the time.
Receipts, right? That's so interesting because that analogy of being the blue square amongst the red circles, where you would think you're not invisible but you're not seen at the same time. It's so you can be very glossed over, even though, which is so funny to me because sometimes I'm 5'10", I'm Black, I have a huge smile, and I'll be like, you didn't, and people don't remember me, and I'm like, bruh, how do you not remember me? I'm like this, and so it's that thing of you being invisible at the same time is crazy. But to that extent, I always made my work show up for me. I made my work almost irreproachable, which is not a great thing. It's a bit, like I said, it's a lot of pressure and stress, because you're I can't make mistakes, or I have to be able to support my decisions. And so at the same time, you're growing in your career, you're told you have to start putting yourself out there. You're not going to just be having people direct you and say, do this, do that. You're going to have to start at some point coming up with ways to direct or ways to build out your own strategies. And that can be very scary, because not only do you have to fit in this world where you're seen but not seen, but then you have to, because I feel like you're definitely seen when your stuff is not up to par, even more so than, the majority culture, right? So for me, it showed up as just being very diligent with my work, making sure that all my, like, everything looked great. And that's a habit now that it's just part of me. Um, Also, if I had to do presentations, I did nothing on the fly, everything was being prepared, going over things, checking and double checking. Also finding you know, I call them, like, not necessarily mentors at work, but sponsors to you could run things by, because sometimes they may be a peer in a different department, or someone to just basically kind of validate what you're doing and say, does this sound right? And those are things that it is extra work in and of itself, where sometimes, you see other people come in and do things on the fly and not get things perfect. But again, the repercussions were different. And so, knowing that and seeing that, then you know you have to overcome that, or encounter that, or deal with it, or just work your way through it. That was the learning that I had, that kind of reinforced, like, having impeccable work. Not feeling like I had the grace to make very many mistakes.
Yeah, and it's one thing to let your work speak for itself. It's another to feel like I have to let the work speak for itself, but I have to prove it over 10 times with 10 times as much data. And I got all the backups in the
Yep.
appendices in my deck. You asked me a question, I got it. I can answer it. And 10 other ones that you didn't think of.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to think that that contributes a lot to the need to just zone out after work too, when you're constantly in protection mode, when you're
Yeah.
in proving mode, when you're in I got to spend 5 more hours on this than Joe sitting next to me would. It takes a lot of energy, and when you get home at
Yes.
the end of the day, it's like I got nothing left.
I got nothing. I got the couch. I got this. I got the remote control. Don't talk to me.
So, what Takesha and I were talking about here was this kind of overworking, overproving, needing to back up your backup and have a backup for that as well. And oftentimes it comes up because you are different from the rest of the people in the room. When you're different, when your style is different, when your work style is different, when your appearance is different, when your upbringing is different from the other people in the room, this can create this kind of feeling like we need to prove something or constantly be on the defense. And frankly, a lot of times this is true. But what I want to point out here is that kind of this coming home at the end of the day and just crashing on the couch, oftentimes we think about this as a physical drain. I'm exhausted. I need to veg out and disconnect from the rest of the world. But what I've come to learn and understand about burnout is that it's not just physical. Sure, we might feel just physically tired at the end of the day, but we have to think about mental, emotional, and physical being all elements as a part of this. And in the research around burnout, they talk about physical exhaustion as being just that, right? We're tired, we're not getting enough sleep, we're not nourishing our bodies or moving in the ways that we should. And you feel physically exhausted. Mental exhaustion is a little bit different. And this is kind of a sense of, do I feel effective? Do I feel like I have the tools, the knowledge, the resources that I need to get my job done? Do I feel capable and competent? And when we don't have that, we can experience what's called like a more mental burnout, this feeling of inefficacy. And when it comes to emotional, this is really about motivation, it's about connection. Do you feel a sense of purpose in the work that you're doing? Do you feel connected to the people that you're working with? And oftentimes, when we don't have that connection to the people or even a connection to the purpose, it can feel a little bit like a sense of cynicism of like, what does it even matter? Like, why should I do that? Or if you're in a situation where you're working really hard and the work that you're doing isn't showing up to people, you don't feel seen, you don't feel recognized, it can build that sense of cynicism of like, why am I working so hard when nobody seems to care? Or I'm working harder toward a cause than the people that actually should really care about it. So consider for yourself, what does this kind of drain look like for you? Is there one where you really lean on more than the others? And that's a symptom that shows up that kind of can point you in the direction of saying, maybe there's something that I need to change here. Maybe there's something I could change about my current role, maybe something I can ask for in terms of how I'm working, or maybe this really isn't a good environment for me.
Gosh, I can't tell you how much I relate to the like go to the office, work, come home, and like veg out on the couch because it's just like there's some kind of like I just need to like dissociate from my life for however many hours. And I look back on it now and I just feel like the like everything was colored with this like gray that doesn't exist in the same. And you're one of the most vibrant people I feel like that I know. And you're just always doing things and having fun and having new experiences. So it's wild to think that was such a huge shift.
I tell you, I met a lot of my friends now are people that I've met since I call it post 40. In which people say you can't make friends when you're older. And I'm like, that's BS. But I always tell them, like, you didn't know me before. I wasn't this light and bright and bubbly. I think I was on the inside, but it did not have as much opportunity to come out. And so I'm like, you'd be glad you know me now.
Well, I mean, I could say the same thing. I mean, I had friends, but like, I feel so different now. So I can totally relate to that. So as you kind of transitioned into the cannabis industry, I think it is like the coolest thing in the world that you started a magazine. Like, how did this come about? Tell me a little bit about why.
This was my pandemic birth story. People something like, what came out of the pandemic for you? Oh, a magazine. I birthed that.
Sourdough bread, or you can start a beautiful publication, because I will tell you, like, Canna Curious is one of the most visually stunning pieces of like media that I've ever seen.
Thank you so much. This is my business partner, Deanna. We were working together at a co-working space, and she had done some projects and some work for some of the clients I was working with before. And pandemic, everything kind of stopped. The market research company I was working with, everything went on hold, and we're like, we're in our houses catching up on Zoom chats and Zoom, happy hours. And we're like, what can we do to work together? And I had the cannabis know-how. She had the design skill set. She also came at it from this point of like, I'm a mother. I have 2 young kids at home, because they have to be homeschooled now. I work from home. She's a graphic designer. And I had a CBD cookie, and it made me a better mom. It made me calm, but I don't want to talk to people about it because they're going to think I'm doing drugs. And we're like, how can we teach women in particular that this is not a drug? And one of the ways we came up with was like, okay, let's do a magazine, but let's make it very beautiful and very approachable, and almost like be that resource, like you're talking to your friend, and give people the information they need. And then if they want to partake in cannabis, CBD, whatever, they have the information. We were just positioning ourselves as this like trusted resource. And so that's what we did. We started it. We started reaching out to folks to do interviews. We got a couple writers to help us, conduct interviews and write articles, because she'd worked on magazines before. I had never worked on magazines, but, we figured it out. And we almost had like nothing to lose. So it's like, in terms of like figuring out the start, because people ask like, how did you do it? I'm like, just start. Like, every time you do it, every issue we've had, and we just launched our 9th one, which is, wow, 3 years later, they get better. We look back at the first one, we're like, oh, the first one wasn't that bad. But then we look now, we're like, it's gotten so much better. And it really taught me about just creating things. Don't wait for other people to create them. Like, if you don't put a financial outcome to it, now mind you, we want to make money, we want to do things, but we literally did it just for the joy and the passion of creating it. And it has like paid off so much in that. And so fast forward a year, and I'm going to say, I've been working on the magazine for a year, and I got this opportunity to work with Flower Hire. So still working in cannabis. But at the time, being an entrepreneur is tough. There's not necessarily consistency of money. And so it's like, I need to make some consistent money, Yeah. But I had requirements in terms of like, I did not want to go back into the old corporate system. I had talked to a few people. I was actually talking to a company, a big CPG company right at the same time as Flower Hire. And I'm so thankful that did not work out, because it would have, it literally was like going backwards, like talking to them about, what they're doing. I was like, oh my gosh, like 5 years later, still doing the same things. But Flower Hire, one, it was like a really good fit for me because, again, cannabis appreciated entrepreneurs. Um, I was their first marketing hire, like full time head of marketing hire. And I was able to help them, like basically all my branding experience that I'd done, all my cannabis experience that I had working with my business partner, to really elevate the look and the feel of cannabis. We were able to apply that, with Flower Hire to really make it elevate jobs in Canada. No pun intended. But but we were like, my goal there is to elevate the brand, really humanize careers in cannabis, and let people know that this is a real opportunity, that there are six-figure jobs. You can feed your family by working in this industry. In addition to, it's a great place for a lot of people who feel that they can't be their full selves at work, or who feel like, I want to do more, because cannabis, like I said, the industry is so new. We need people who are players and coaches, and people who, we've seen so many people accelerate their careers in such a short amount of time, because the network that you build, but also your ability to make an impact really quickly is there. And I love all of that stuff.
I want to go back to you a little bit here in terms of like thinking about taking breaks, taking career breaks or sabbaticals. In one instance, you went back to school. That's obviously not a break. But what has been the role of taking that time away in your overall career, maybe in your well-being?
It's we don't realize how much we get into a routine. And I say a routine because it's almost like you don't even realize you're doing it. And so your mind, everything about your life is just routine. And I think one of our core necessities is also some spontaneity. And it could look different for different people, but if you're in a routine and you feel like every day is Groundhog's Day and you have this yearning for something else, I think a break gives you that space to at least explore what that is, even if it's nothing. You're always going to get something from it. Like taking a break from when I went back to school, you're not working, you're working on schoolwork, but you're not getting paid. You're paying to go there, if anything. So it's still it still was a pressure valve release, like you're like, I'm taking in information versus outputting things, and it was a time to figure out, what did I want to do next? Because I felt like I couldn't move anymore. I was a merchandise planner and I was good at it. And it's a numbers job. And all I kept getting was, more opportunities for promotion within that. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I saw school as the way out to explore something, to change careers. And that's what it was. And then when I quit my corporate job, I saw that as a time to like travel. I just felt this yearning to travel and figure out what was next. So it was a time to really just let new ideas come in and experience new things. And I do believe that, when people say, how do you be creative? Sometimes you have to do nothing and just let things come in, or do only things that are completely different or fun, or, healing to the soul or uplifting to the soul. And it gives your mind the break to just be. I was listening to a podcast today actually about taking breaks to find creativity. Like in those spaces, you need to just be in your feminine energy of being instead of doing, whether that is just, being present, or, being patient, or being creative, but not doing and producing. And so I think that those breaks are just like rejuvenations for the mind. And I'm about to take, 2-week break to go on vacation, because I feel like I need that mind rejuvenation. And that also there's mind rest, like it's rest and rejuvenate, right? So sometimes you just need to step away from the daily routine, the daily requirements, and just recharge with, and I say it's like doing nothing, but it's actually doing a lot. Rest is so essential to, and I think we don't think about resting our brain. We think of resting our bodies, but like resting your brain, I think is essential.
Yeah. That break I think it's, when we talk about, yes, certainly there's a rule for doing nothing, but having a new experience like going to another country or spending some time like working on a creative project, if that's not something you do in your day-to-day work, all of that stuff, right? I think about it as like you have to change the channel. Like if your brain is on the
Yes.
same channel all the time, like you can still actively engage it while you step away from work, but choose a different channel, choose a different,
Oh, I
media.
like that. I like that analogy. Change the channel. I have to change the channel. I'll be back in 2 weeks. I gotta change the
Yeah,
channel.
exactly. I gotta change the channel, getting on a plane. Yeah. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your personal journey as you have, gained more confidence and, kind of connecting with yourself. What has that looked like for you?
Oh, Sunday, goodness gracious. Um, we don't have enough time, but it's it's been a process of just I think very a lot of things, a lot of teachers, a lot of guides, and me just being open to doing to exploring the work of how do I connect better to my own desires? What do I want my life to look like? Not what I was told it should look like. That's really the work. It's like really connecting to I called it my journey to self when I quit my job and was traveling. It's like what does Keisha want? Like how does she want to show up? How does she want to feel every day? And it's a lot of, like we all know, it's that inner child. But like meeting her, talking to her, and being willing to like comfort and soothe her, to be able to let go of a lot of, past hurts, past ways of thinking, to get really comfortable. And so I say I've done lots of things, like I say, guides, like I've worked with coaches. I was going over, I have another laptop that I haven't turned on in like 2 years, and I went to turn it on. I found all this stuff, and I was like, oh my God, I forgot I did this type of coaching, deep coaching. And I did attachment style work, and I've done Enneagram with you. We've done some work together, and multiple assessments through the career field. But I think in general, like in the private world, in your personal life, it is, and it's a fun journey. Like I don't say it's like fun, because sometimes you have to uncover things. But the more you get used to, like, don't be afraid of you. I'd say, don't be afraid of what comes up, because it can only make you better, if that is your choice of getting out of your way, getting out of ruts. And so, now I actually today even I had like a Reiki session. This is my second time doing Reiki, and I was like, I just explore different things and be like, oh, let's see, what's this like? And I found it really helpful. I don't know, and it was distance Reiki too. So I was like, I don't know what this is, but I found it to be very helpful, very grounding, and so and also just sometimes having those like kind of forced points of space to not think and then see what comes to you. I'm a very firm believer in that. Like sometimes just step away, and our mind works so fast and we want to just have answers and do everything. And sometimes just pause and see what comes to you, and then trust what comes to you. Don't question it, like, so, say, hey, you know what? Today I wasn't feeling so great yesterday. And I was like, you know what? I just need to lay down because I don't feel good. And I did. And then by that evening, I felt better. I mean, I took like one meeting because I had to. But other than that, I was like, cancel meetings because like, I don't feel well. And so instead of trying to force and push my way through, I just relaxed. And then today I felt better, So instead of trying to push my way through and then feeling sick for 2 or 3 days, it's like, okay, listen to yourself, listen to your body. And the way to do that is by understanding yourself and doing the work. And people say the work, and I say my work is like finding different guides, finding different teachers, finding different coaches, exploring and seeing what connects. And then I always say, take what you need, leave the rest on the table. You don't have to believe everything everyone says, but take what you need, and then keep it moving.
I want to call out just how cool I think Tekisha's willingness to throw herself into different things is. This desire to kind of like stretch yourself and learn and push yourself outside of your comfort zone. I think it's one of the things that she and I have in common, and it's one of the reasons that we're such good friends. And it can look very different to different people. So her and I both have talked about taking time away from work for extended amounts of time to kind of reset, reconnect with ourselves, and understanding that that's not necessarily something that everybody has the privilege to be able to do. And so I want you to think about, how can you kind of change the channel? How can you maybe try some different things, like do a Reiki session, or having the support of a coach and having that person to bounce ideas off of and really help you process out loud what's going on for you. Those things can be invaluable. So I want you to think about this not necessarily as, how do I take a sabbatical, but how can I be really well resourced in the ways that I'm learning about myself and experiencing new things. And those are the things that can really help us reconnect with ourselves. Sometimes in order to be ourselves, we have to find ourselves. So ask yourself, what might I be able to do? What are some things that I can look up that might just take an hour or 15 minutes? It might be something new to experiment and try.
Yes, and you and I met while I was on a long sabbatical in Colombia, the country Colombia, and you just typically have embraced travel as a part of your lifestyle. Like you said, you're taking 2 weeks away. I'm curious about the role. That was a little bit of a tangent, but as you think about the work that you've done, how you've invested in yourself, the thing that I know we have in common is we kind of throw ourselves into experiences that might be uncomfortable because we know that there's growth on the other side. And I think that's a core value thing of like, I want to always be growing, and therefore I'm going to toss myself over the edge of this thing that's going to be not fun in the process, but I'll be glad that I did it. What have been some of the things that have been really challenging in your journey of, as you've put it before, kind of like building this sense of radical self-love?
That it actually, you have to confront that your way of thinking is wrong. So one point, and this is one example, I won't go deep into it, but around dating, if I was saying, oh, nobody, I'm too smart, I'm too this, I'm too that, guys don't like me. And my friend was like, those are all just excuses. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. I am just coming up with excuses so I don't have to do anything. And so it's like, no, what you're saying is not right. So it's challenging when you have to admit to yourself, like, yeah, I'm wrong. I just like to say these things so I don't have to do anything. That right there has been the biggest challenge, but also it causes the most growth. And if you have people around you that will call you to the carpet like that, man, you can move faster to finding your truth, I'd say. Because I would say, it's like, trust yourself, but there's sometimes you have to question yourself. Like, is this true? Or am I just holding on to this so I don't have to do anything else? So I can just continue to, and the word, when she said excuse, that just clicked with me. It's like, that's an excuse. You're not really trying to change anything. And then also sometimes in talking about radical self-love and loving yourself, it is about questioning, like, is this true? So if you have a problem with your body or whatever, you're like, is this true though? Or, and most times the answer is no. And so you're like, okay, it's not true. But even so, like right now, this is the practice that I have. I just tell myself I love you all the time. I'm like, I love you, Keisha. I love you, girl. All the time. Like, I don't wait for someone else to do it. It's lovely, yeah, by the way. But that's part of my practice of it, is I tell myself that all the time. And it's like something that you do, because the practice of it is to accept myself no matter what, good or bad, achieving, not achieving, doing something, not doing anything, just because I'm here. And that, once you like really connect to that you don't have to do anything to be loved by yourself, and I think that is very important. Like we socialize all the time to find the love of other people, but it's like, you have to really connect to yourself too, in order to do that for other people. You have to accept yourself. And we are so accepting a lot of times of other people and their faults, but not our own. And why? Why not? And in the excuse could be, well, I just need to do this. I need to lose 5 pounds. I need to do, like, no, today, you're amazing.
Yeah. And gosh, not to say that I relate, but I do, in the sense of coming up with reasons not to maybe put yourself out there in the world. And it could be in a relationship or career or whatever, right? Because
Yes.
what happens if you get that thing?
Whew.
And what happens if you get that thing and you get rejected, or you do fully put yourself out there and it's not wanted? Like, that is scary.
Yeah. But you have to come up to this point where you're like so sick of where you are that you like, I got to move. So whatever happens, I'm going to be able to handle it, but I need to move. And I always tell people that, like, I'm not like, oh, go do it, go do it, go do it. I was like, when you're ready, you will move. Because it's naturally like some people have to get so sick of something that they want to make a change. And not everyone does. And that's okay. Because let other people live their lives. You just live yours, you know? That's something my business partner has been saying, that I've been saying a lot. It's so freeing. Let them. Stop trying to conform and, you know, especially if someone's not treating you the way that you want to be treated. You can leave. Stop trying to change them. Let them be them. You get the choice to be you. Knowing that and having that security that you always have an option. And this goes back to jobs too, maybe because I've had so many. Like, I never feel like I can't ever get another one or try to work for myself or build one. You know, it's scary. Absolutely. And there's days where I'm like, oh my God, but I never feel like I can't do anything. Like, I feel like I have value. And so that allows me to kind of continue to sometimes take these leaps. And I just took one where I just moved, you know, states again. And people are like, how do you do it? How do you? I'm like, I needed to uproot myself because I need to do some bigger things. And this is the only way it needed to happen. And I've been fine so far. So I trust that I'll be fine again.
Yes. Collect the evidence, take the leap and collect the evidence that, hey, I'm good. I'm still here.
Yes. Yes.
So as you've been developing this radical self-love, you know, in yourself, what role has that played in how you show up in your career, how you're bringing more of yourself to the table, how you're letting things go more easily, feeling more confident in what you're bringing, letting your work truly speak for itself?
A couple things. One is sometimes when you just realize that sometimes people are okay with mediocrity. And so you don't have to feel like, not saying you're being mediocre, but like, the bar doesn't always need to be so high. You know what I mean? For everything. That's one of the things that I have learned. So that I don't overwork. You know what I mean? Like, and that's part of the overworking was part of like not feeling confident, not feeling, wanting to not, to have any questions about my work. Now it's like, this is what's needed and that's what I delivered and that's okay. And moving on. Right. The other thing is I think sometimes it's just experience. Like some things just take time to settle in. And you know, so I will talk to younger people at work and then they're so anxious about certain things. And sometimes I'm like, you just need to keep doing it because, you know, the more you do it, the more the more confidence you will develop. You know, it's not about ego. Like I have to know everything. No, use your resources. If people don't understand who you are, what you're talking about, what your point of view is, be willing to say what you need to say. And if they have questions, answer them point blank. Like that's it. You know, everyone's not going to understand everything about you. Everyone's not going to understand everything about your culture. But that doesn't mean that you should assimilate and bury it for their comfort because it's their comfort, your discomfort. And I am a firm believer that a lot of that discomfort and that suppression equals like, you know, stress and disease. And, you know, I'm not trying to be sick. So it's like, I'm going to show up as I am. And if you have a question, I'll answer it. Yeah. Or tell you to Google it. Like, go to YouTube, go to TikTok. TikTok has everything, right? Go search it on TikTok.
Yeah. Yes, I do a lot of research on TikTok these days, but I definitely remember the first job where I was out of the traditional corporate world and I had to launch a CRM system or something. And I was like, I'll Google it. Let me see what's out there. How would people do this? Somebody's written an article about it. And it was just like one of those things where it's like, wow, I'm really Googling something in my job.
Right.
It's great. It's great.
It is. There was a meme going around saying, with someone recently was saying, I'm older than Google. And I was like, that sounds old, but Google is it 1994? They're like, or 1998. Something like, I was like, oh my gosh, that's not old at all. But
That is wild. It really is not. So for somebody who feels like this idea that of radical self-love, for someone who feels like that idea might be inaccessible, what would you say? How did you get started?
I wrote down what were the actions that, or almost like what were the areas that I wasn't loving about myself, right? And then what were the actions I needed to take to overcome them, right? So if I was talking about my body, I had like 100% body positivity. What did that mean? That mean no negative talk about my body at all, like none. Just be thankful for it. Thankful you got something to get your ass out of bed and walk you around and can take you places and all these things. So 100% body positivity. Another one was like, I was very tied to achievements in terms of like my self-worth. So it was like loving myself no matter what. Good. And that's part of what I was saying earlier about like just telling myself I love you or whatever. I accept you, because that was something from a corporate standpoint. Almost like I'm giving myself a quarterly review. And like, no, it doesn't work that way. And you don't need that. Like, you just need to be, you are here. That's all you need to do, actually. It's just be here. So I'd say write down those things that you feel you don't love, or that that you feel like I need to get better at, and then, or what are the things that are preventing you from doing certain things, so like not having body positivity prevented me from like feeling comfortable going to the beach, which is crazy. It was all in my head, like literally all in my head. And that's something that I can see on the opposite side of it, because now I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. Write down those things, come up with what can you do to change them. And a lot of time it is, people say laugh at affirmations, but it is changing your mind. You've literally been telling yourself in the background one thing, and so now you need to tell yourself a different thing. And once that switch is flipped, man, though, it's like magic. And it's literally one thing that I feel like you can completely control yourself. Trying to find a partner, trying to find a business, make a business work, those are external. You have to, they involve other people usually, and things like, involve someone else. But loving yourself only involves you. And it is the best work that I think anyone can do, because what stems from it is you give people permission to love themselves too. I don't necessarily know how I do it, but like you say, I think it's just the light that you start to emit. People are like, oh, I want that, you're just more content overall. I have my days for sure. But overall, I kind of go back to that center of, sometimes I'm just here, and that's enough, and that's okay. And I don't have to prove nothing to nobody.
Yeah, that is really beautiful. And I was picturing you putting your strategies and your KPIs, 100% body positivity. How am I going to measure it? I'm going to tell myself 4 times a day that I love my body. Like, you made a strategic plan. Your OGSM, if you will.
Okay, so I know I made a joke about Tekisha's action plan around how she was going to build radical self-love, but this truly is one of those things where if you can make it tangible, it's so much more accessible than saying, I'm going to shift from being hard on myself to start loving myself. And that kind of thing can feel really inaccessible. A lot of times with my clients, I hear things like, oh, I'm really hard on myself, or I have a really harsh inner critic, or I really push myself to do more and work harder. And I think this is one of the main reasons that oftentimes we don't feel like we can be compassionate with ourselves, because we feel like maybe if I'm easy on myself, I'm going to lose my edge, or I won't perform in the same way that I do. If I'm nice to myself, I won't be able to deliver everything that I deliver today, because that voice has been pushing me my whole life. And so now if I change it, what's going to happen? So I want to offer a reframe here. And it's because I think this idea of radical self-acceptance and radical self-love can feel really huge. And it can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get there. And one of the things that I practiced and that I learned in my own journey, frankly, was like just getting back in touch with my own emotions. And I took a class on something called mindful self-compassion. And there's a lot of research around mindful self-compassion. And there's a methodology to it, which you can learn more about at the link in the show notes. There's a, 2 to 3 to 5 minute practice of a self-compassion break. But what I want to talk about here is that there's tons of research that shows that it actually has a positive impact, not only on our physical health and our mental health and our emotional health, but beyond all of those things, it's just as good for us internally and externally. And it actually leads to better self-compassion leads to better communication and improved decision making and enhanced resilience and becoming a more empathetic and a better leader. So all of those things that you're striving for at work are actually outcomes of being more compassionate with yourself. So there's tangible benefits to this and things that'll help you in your career, and they'll actually help you perform better versus using that kind of inner judge over and over to push yourself. And so this is a more sustainable long-term way that we can be successful. We can build this new muscle around self-acceptance and self-compassion. And think about it very simply as like treating yourself the same way that you would treat a friend. When that inner critic or that inner voice pops up, if you made a mistake and you are beating yourself up about it, what would you say to a friend who is in that same situation or is beating themselves up about something? You would approach that situation very differently. And these little practices, noticing when that voice is happening, making those small shifts in that voice around how would I say this if a friend was saying the same things to me? These little practices, like Keisha was talking about, looking yourself in the mirror, reminding yourself how much you like yourself, these tiny little things actually help us develop new neural pathways. And it's like building a muscle. So if you can practice them over and over again, the hard things, the really heavy things are going to get lighter.
It's really crazy about intentions. When they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That's what happened. When I said I wanted to do this, I was in Colombia on one of my, traveling in my countries, and this girl that I met traveling there, we ended up just doing some excursions together today. And she was like, I do this work. And I was like, oh my gosh. And she gave me some things to do. She's like, some mirror work, sitting in front of the mirror, saying these things, dancing in front of the mirror. And it works. So I would say, if you take the first step, the universe, God, whoever you want to call, your friend, someone will show up to take you to the next step. And it's just about taking the first step. And that, I didn't have all the KPIs, but I did have a start. I had the first two. I was like, no, because I in my head, I was like, I don't understand this I don't understand it. I need more, what are the things you actually do? How do you do this? What's the how? It's not just bubble baths. It's, so the first thing you do is you have to figure out where are the parts of you that you're not loving, and then address those. Because the bubble bath ain't gonna do nothing if you just if you don't know, why you're not loving yourself. It's not gonna magically make you love yourself more. You're just gonna get clean.
You're gonna get clean, a little bubbly. I so resonate though too, and I think a lot of people may find some support, maybe an eye roll, because I think at the end of the day, people really just want tell me the one thing to do and I'll go do it. And this is a practice, as you said. It is a multiple times a day in small ways, but very tangible ways to build a new muscle. To sit and look at yourself in the mirror, to remind yourself if you maybe had a shitty day that you're like, hey, you know what? I love you. I'm still here for you. Yeah. You're good. You're good.
Yes, you're good. I like that. It's you're still here. You're okay. You're breathing. You're and those things, it's just paying attention to yourself. One of the things too, I would suggest is writing down all the things that make you happy on a piece of paper. And when you're feeling terrible, go to that paper and do one of those things. It sounds corny, but it really works. Because if it makes you happy, then, sometimes you need a little soothing, and go do one of those things, and what it's taking a walk in nature. I used to love to walk my dog, or polishing my toenails, or crocheting. And then that like literally will kind of ease you back in to like, feeling a different way. But write that. I think a lot of people don't even write that list down of like, what makes you happy? What are some things that make you happy? And just, write down, keep writing, like write 20 things. And even if it's small things, like I loved, going for a drink with a friend. Sometimes I feel like going to sit at the bar. I love that now. I used to be afraid to go sit anywhere by myself. Now I'm just like, what? Like sometimes I don't want to go with people. I just want to be with myself. I don't want to talk, and that's usually a decompression moment. The introvert in me needs sometimes some downtime. And it's like, I don't want to talk. I just want to sit here. I sit at the bar. I have my drink. I don't even have, or I'll eat. I don't even have my phone out because that's not the purpose. It's literally to do nothing but outside. And so I want people around me, but I don't necessarily want to be talking to them. And that's one of the things I like. But then there's other times where I'm like, I need someone to like have shenanigans with, like you can like, be silly and things like that. So
I think there's something so like nurturing about taking yourself out somewhere and doing something solo. It's like a lot of times people might say, I need to decompress. I'm going to do it at home in sweatpants. I don't want to see anyone or do anything. But there's just something that's there's a very different energy about going and doing that somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're like out. So sometimes you just need to be out. Like, again, it's part of like, I think breaking the routine. That's one of the main things. I'll like pick somewhere new. Or if I have a favorite place, then I'll go to that favorite place, to chill and unwind and connect with my favorite bartender.
I love it. Okay, so we could talk forever, but I want to close out with a question that I will be asking everybody, which is, what does it mean to you to be yourself at work?
To be myself at work, it means showing up as myself without feeling the need to conform or suppress who I am to like the dominant culture. It means being okay to exist and express my differences without like fear of repercussions. That's what I mean. And I think the repercussions are like, not feeling like, oh, I won't get promoted, or I won't be a part of the special project, or I won't be, tapped to go to this meeting because of little things like the way that I wear my hair, or the way that I dress, or the things that I talk about, or, the fact that my family situation may be different than everyone else's. And so they're all talking about their kids and I'm talking about my dog. I'm like, I want to be feeling okay with those differences and not feeling like I need to not talk about them or hide them because people may not understand me. That's what it means to me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on. It was lovely to see you as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right.
I think you're going to be an amazing podcast host. You already are. And I can't wait to hear all the other episodes.
Well, and I know that there are many people who will listen to your wisdom and find something that they can relate to, that inspires them, that can help them maybe take a small action tomorrow.
Yeah, that's all it takes. A little bitty one.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thanks, Keisha.
Thank you.
I hope you were able to take a lot away from that episode. We covered a lot of ground. Just a couple of things to wrap up and some resources that I'll offer you. We talked about paying attention to your energy, both in new jobs and new companies and seeing how the environments impact you, but also thinking about your physical, mental, and emotional energy. And there's a great podcast about burnout and the stress cycle. And they reference some of these symptoms of burnout as exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy. There's some really great information in there to kind of continue that practice of paying attention to what's going on in your body. We also talked about self-acceptance and self-love and self-compassion. And I'm going to link the website for mindful self-compassion and also a quick audio practice that you can try. And a self-compassion break takes, like I said, 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most. And it's something that you can learn, make your own, and incorporate it into your day-to-day. And last, I want to leave you with a little nudge to try something new. Change the channel and experiment with some new ways to learn more about yourself, or find new ways to practice true self-care, going beyond the bubble baths and the spa days. And don't get me wrong, I love a spa day, but think about what it is that you need and what are some new things that you can maybe explore and experiment with that are going to meet your needs.